2012 Margaret Brent Award recipient, Amy Schulman. Born in the 1960s in New York City, Amy Schulman's early life was filled with glimpses of the amazing lawyer she was to become. As a voracious young reader, Amy gave herself a rule. She would have to finish each of the books in a series at her school library before starting a new one. She did, however, allow herself a dispensation if there were more than 10 books in a series. Although she had an appreciation for rules early in her life, she also knew that rules always were subject to both interpretation and appellate review, even when it came to her summer reading. Whether it was being a child of divorced parents long before that was common, or the only female philosophy major in her class, Amy always was a little bit different than the worlds she inhabited. These experiences helped her learn the importance of flexibility, autonomy, operating in different environments, and the benefits that come from taking risks. With a grandfather who was a federal judge, her grandmother a legal secretary, a mother who started her career as a labor lawyer at age 45, and a father who was also a lawyer, a calling to law always has been in Amy's DNA. After graduating Phi Beta Kappa from Wesleyan University, Amy went on to Yale Law School, where she graduated in 1989. She began private practice as a litigator with Cleary, Gottlieb, Steen, and Hamilton in New York, and after a 7-year run, Amy joined DLA Piper as a partner. From 1997 to 2008, she led the mass tort practice, handling some of the most complex legal, scientific, and regulatory challenges facing the world's largest and most reputable companies: GE Healthcare, Wyeth, Cisco, Altria, Kraft, and Pfizer. Her practice group soon became the largest in the firm, paving the way for Amy to become the first woman to serve on the firm's global board and its U.S. Executive Committee. She also was instrumental in transforming the way DLA Piper leadership viewed its obligation to develop women and diverse talent. In 2008, Amy joined Pfizer Incorporated as general counsel when the company was exploring the purchase of Wyeth Pharmaceuticals. She played a key role in the negotiations leading up to what became the largest pharmaceutical acquisition in history. When she transitioned from counselor to client, she wanted to fix what she viewed as the biggest barrier to attorney-client relationships, the billable hour. So she designed and launched the Pfizer Legal Alliance, a groundbreaking approach to engaging outside counsel that transforms the traditional billable hour model and produces better results for the company and its firms. In December 2010, in addition to her role as general counsel, Amy became president and general manager of Pfizer Nutrition, a $2.1 billion global business that develops and sells clinically based infant formulas and other nutrition products in more than 60 countries. Amy also is active on various boards, including, but not limited to, serving on the board of directors of the Brooklyn Academy of Music and the Honors Committee of the Association of the Bar of the City of New York. Aside from her professional accomplishments, Amy is committed to her 3 amazing sons and relishes spending time with each of them and enjoying their unique perspectives on life. She is an avid biker and still enjoys a good book. Finally, Amy is committed to spending some of her political capital and using her voice to ensure women have a seat at the table. In part due to the parity programs she helps to lead as executive sponsor of Pfizer's Global Women's Council, the company has seen a significant increase of women in senior-level jobs from 2009 to 2011. Passionate about reigniting the enthusiasm of practicing law that she feels in younger colleagues, Amy is one of a small number of general counsels who hire lawyers directly out of law school. In honor of her illustrious career and her commitment to the advancement of women in the law, the American Bar Association Commission on Women in the Profession is proud to present the 2012 Margaret Brent Women Lawyers of Achievement Award to Amy Schulman.
Good afternoon, and thank you. I'd like to begin talking about courage, and specifically about women and courage. When I learned that I was going to receive the Margaret Brent Award, courage seemed like an obvious first thought. Why? Because it was scary to believe that I could add my voice in a meaningful way to the conversation that preceded mine and the amazing group of women who have already obtained this award. My close cousin, Judith Resnick, my dear friend, Sheila Birnbaum, who taught my mother, who was herself a law school graduate at the age of 45. Elizabeth Cabraser, a fierce adversary of mine from my days in private practice. Judith Vladeck, who started the law firm where my mother first practiced. And Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who shared a clerkship with my father in the Southern District of New York, to name but a few. So courage in the sense of believing, that I can stand on the podium. So courage in the sense, and now we'll all relax. So courage in the sense of believing that I could join the Brent conversation in any meaningful way. But courage because so many of my predecessors here have the courage of trailblazers. We heard from some of them today. The first Pacific American Chief Justice of the state of California, the first woman litigation partner at Jenner, to name but a few, and preceding them, of course, Margaret Brent, the first woman acting as a lawyer in these United States. Being the first is definitely a courageous and often a lonely act. But as one of my sons observed, that sort of courage doesn't really apply to me, the general counsel and a business person at a Fortune 500 company. Of course, courage is very contextual. To another of my children, this time my 12-year-old son, courage is not freaking out if you have a spider on your face. But general counsel and business leader at Pfizer, not exactly a child's definition of courage. So as I was sitting there feeling humbled, and since courage is often about conquering fear, I thought of the first fear that I remember conquering. And I'd like to begin with that story. Although, mind you, it's about courage with a very small c. But it is one of the first scary things that I remember overcoming. I was 7, and I was in the 2nd grade. Now, I grew up in New York City as a young child, a very young child, in the 1960s, and my amazing mother had a few quirks, including her own sense, or her lack thereof, of time. Inevitably, I was the very last child picked up from school. So at age 7, we decided that we would come up with what seemed like a very ingenious idea, namely that I would learn to take myself home from school. Now, this involved 2 crosstown bus transfers, significantly crossing a busy intersection with 2-way traffic, and I was in 2nd grade, so unlike now, I was pretty short. Where did I find the courage to do this? Well, it's simple. I found it from my mother. She taught me how to cross a street alone. She told me, you just need to brazen your way across the street, stare the cars down, and walk with confidence. Cars turning in 2 different directions, horns blaring, 2-way traffic, and my mother's simple advice: find a point of entry, make eye contact, and brazen your way across without hesitating. That was pretty good advice. There was, however, a second part to my mother's advice. She told me, if you get scared, find someone, probably a woman, who looks nice, tell her you're afraid, and ask her to help you across the street. Brazen your way across, and if you get scared, ask a woman for help. Thank you, Mom. Pretty solid advice, even today. Okay, so now that we've established that I know how to cross a street, or at least I do in most places, evidently not in Seattle where jaywalking is illegal, I'd like to ask what crossing a street has to do with courage in any meaningful sense to this 51-year-old woman. How much courage, if any, does it take to succeed as a woman in the legal profession today? Is courage an operative principle when many of my colleagues, and certainly my children's contemporaries, think we should live in a world beyond gender? Do professional women still need to act as pioneers? And if so, what is that costing us? And here's where I'd like to ask those of you who have a seat at the table, which is all of us in this room, and ask, do we have the courage to persist in a conversation that many people think is over because they believe we live in a degendered world, or that these are irrelevant conversations by out-of-touch people who, quote, want to have it all. And yet the statistics are simply not reassuring. Roughly 18% of equity partners at law firms are women. Less than 3% of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies are female, although we've added a few notable additions lately. And only 17% of board seats in the United States are held by women. The issue is clearly not about entry-level access or explicit institutional norms, but rather about true inclusion that demands that the dominant logic or voice of an institution make way for a more nuanced, inclusive palette. And here, I would like to have a little courage and invite you to wade into the fray with me just a bit. I would ask, why does the question of the role of women in the workforce so frequently get framed as a question of whether, quote, we can have it all? It isn't accidental that the complex issue of women's persistent inequality gets posed as a question about having it all. That formulation is a lens that subtly but powerfully sidesteps institutional unconscious bias and makes binary and individual a series of interrelated choices and assumptions, and somehow is designed to make us feel that we want too much or are careless about the price our ambition costs others. It's not that I don't recognize that it's complicated or how uniquely privileged I am. I am the first to say and to believe that my choices are simply that, and that no one has it all. I have 3 amazing children, and I am not the parent I would be if I were home more often. Thank goodness, they say, only imagining me at home more often. Of course, if I were home more often, I wouldn't have the career I have had or the network of extraordinary colleagues, many of whom have joined me here in Chicago today. Thank you for joining me. But what's wrong is not that we want too much or blithely think that we are entitled to it all, but that as long as that is the lens through which we allow the conversation to be conducted, so long as that is the lens through which we explain the persistent failure to achieve full equality in our own voices, that will be the vehicle through which we are divided and conquered. We need to have the courage to insist on calling out pernicious false choices and refuse to remain hostage to unconscious biases. So please, join me in wading into the midst of this noisy and clamorous intersection of women in today's workplace. I hope we all have the courage to brazen our way across what used to limit women from having the full range of opportunities. And remember, when you get scared, ask a friendly woman for help. Thank you.